Welcome to today's presentation, Swan versus Charlotte, Reinforcing Desegregation in Schools, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, whose mission is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery, and the legacy of that struggle, and strives to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education was a landmark Supreme Court case decided in 1971 and played a significant role in the desegregation of schools in the United States. The case was brought with the help of the NAACP Legal Fund by the family of 6-year-old James Swan and 9 other students' families in Charlotte, North Carolina. Swan was chosen as the defendant given his parents were economically well off enough that he was the least likely to suffer from retaliation. The case was filed against Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education, which was responsible for the school system in the city. This Supreme Court case took place years after the landmark Brown v. Board of Education. Brown v. Board was a landmark Supreme Court case decided in 1954. The case was brought by a group of Black American parents who sued the Topeka, Kansas School Board for maintaining a segregated school system. The plaintiffs argued that the segregation of schools violated the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection under the law. In its ununanimous decision, the court held that segregation in public schools was inherently unequal and violated the Constitution. The decision marked a turning point in the civil rights movement and paved the way for the further progress towards desegregation and equal opportunity for all Americans, especially in education. However, despite the precedent of Brown v. Board, many school systems across the South were still segregated years after. Despite being a relatively moderate southern state, Charlotte, North Carolina's neighborhood districting plan led the schools to remain relatively segregated, with most white schools being further away from the city. Therefore, Charlotte Mecklenburg was still a heavily racially segregated school system, with Black American students attending mostly minority schools with inferior facilities and resources compared to their white counterparts. Swan's parents and those of the other Black students sued the board, arguing that the continued segregation of the schools violated their constitutional right to equal protection under the law. The district court initially ruled in favor of the board, finding that the segregation of schools in Charlotte was not intentional and therefore did not violate the Constitution. However, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the decision, holding that the district's policies did indeed violate the Constitution. The case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court, which issued an ununanimous decision in favor of the plaintiffs. The court held that school districts had an affirmative obligation to eliminate the vestiges of segregation and to ensure that their policies were not perpetuating segregation. In its decision, the court also upheld the concept of busing as a remedy for school segregation. The court held that busing students from one school to another, even across district lines, was a legitimate means of achieving integration. This decision was controversial and faced resistance from many white parents and politicians, many who argued that busing was disruptive and violated their rights. Additionally, the use of busing as a tool for integration has also faced criticism for its unintended consequences, such as the resegregation of schools in some areas and the decline of public support for desegregation efforts. Despite the controversy, the Swan decision paved the way for significant progress in desegregating schools across the country. School districts were required to develop and implement plans to achieve desegregation, rather than just expecting it to happen, and the federal government provided funding and oversight to support these efforts. Charlotte, North Carolina became a blueprint for other cities and other school systems to follow in their attempt to desegregate. However, over the years, the implementation of desegregation plans has been uneven and has faced many challenges. Resistance from white parents and politicians, as well as court decisions, have limited the scope of desegregation efforts, having slowed the progress to a total stop in some areas. The busing system was also struck down in Charlotte in 1997 when a judge ruled that a racial unitary system had been achieved at most schools and therefore busing was no longer required. Still, the legacy of the Swan decision continues to be felt, and there remains a landmark case in the ongoing struggle for equal educational opportunity for all students. The court's decision establishing the principle that school districts have an affirmative obligation to eliminate segregation, and that busing was a legitimate means of achieving that goal. Although progress has been slow and uneven, with many schools in the U.S. continuing to be segregated across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines, the Swan decision remains a crucial landmark in the ongoing struggle to ensure that education is equal for all in the United States. Thank you for attending today's presentation. Please help us by completing a brief survey at the link on your screen and also in the video description. Your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Additionally, please contact NAHOF with any questions or comments, or if you're interested in learning more about the organization. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and we hope to see you at our next presentation. Thank you.